My name is Hilary, and I have 3 boys, and I've had postpartum depression 3 times. So I was pretty predisposed to depression, anxiety. I guess, I don't know, my whole life I was kind of stress prone, but really big life changes kind of do a number on me, I've learned over the years. So I experienced some anxiety and depression issues when I started college, when I started my first, I guess, out of college job. But I wasn't really expecting postpartum to be the experience that it was. It really kind of hit me like a semi-truck. Like, I was not prepared at all. With my first, we had a very traumatic birth experience, and I won't go into the details, but we thought he was going to die right when he was born. He was baptized immediately. He ended up in the NICU for a week. And so it was a very surreal experience because I didn't have the perfect birth of your first child and the whole, just these feelings of love and joy, and none of that happened. It was utter terror from like a few seconds after he was born. It wasn't until about 11 o'clock in the morning, the day after he was born, that I finally got to see him since he was first born. And it was very hard to believe that he was mine, which sounds really strange. Not like I was afraid he was switched at birth or something, but rationally, I couldn't process it properly, I guess. It's like I saw him and I knew he was my husband's son, but there was this estrangement, I guess, caused by that separation from the beginning. And it was just very hard to process. And during that week in the hospital, I went through a lot of feelings of what they told me later was like psychosis. So not just like depression, but I was having some really weird thoughts out there. Like really just disturbing images would flash across my brain, and I would, just see things that really made me uncomfortable. And they always tell you, and what I've always heard is, talk to someone if you're feeling like you are having, feelings of depression or anxiety, thoughts of suicide, and like they just, the scary stuff. Really, I processed things externally, so I had to talk to someone. I know people tend to hide it because they think I can do this. I don't want to let on that I'm weak or let on that I have problems. I was terrified not to talk to somebody because I needed a support network. I needed someone to help me understand what was going on. So I talked to my husband, I talked to my mom, I talked to the doctors. That was just the first week. And it probably wasn't until a month into his life that I finally sought out help and actually went to a doctor to get something to help me. And we started me on progesterone injections, and then I think oral progesterone after a while to kind of regulate my hormones. But it was really, ultimately, I ended up also taking antidepressants. We had a lot of life changes during that time period. So we moved when he was a month old. I started a new job when my son was 3 months old. So there's lots of stuff to cause extra stress, and that external stress obviously added to it. So I was really not myself, I would say, until he was about a year old. And that's when I finally felt like I was back to normal, I guess. My second son, when he was born, things were much more joyful. We had a little bit more stability. Things were definitely, more as they should be. And the birth experience was perfect. And so I had that exactly what I had been longing for, that moment of bliss. Your child is born and you just have nothing but absolute love and joy at seeing them. And he was able to nurse right away, and we took him home, and we had about 2 good weeks of just everything's wonderful. And then my hormones plummeted again, and it was terrible. And that was probably the worst bout of depression I've ever had. My doctor said that when she saw me, I looked like a shell of a person. And she was very worried about me. Both of those times, but with my first and my second son, I did have thoughts of suicide. I had just those feelings of my family would be better off without me, which I kind of laugh because it's to me now, looking back, it's a ridiculous thought. I know that's not the truth, but in that moment, when you're in that state, you can't see it, and it's really, really hard to break out of that. And lots of people will tell you they understand, or they know what's going on. And I felt so often like, no, you don't get it. You really don't get it. And I had such a hard time articulating what I was going through. It's very isolating. The thing is, what I've learned up till this point is that you're not alone. Lots of women deal with these same things, maybe to a lesser extent, maybe to a greater extent. But again, I felt very, very alone, at least among family and friends. Again, I had that support network, which was really important, but that loneliness is huge. And in those times with the when things were at their worst, and I'm sitting there asking God, what is going on? Where are you? Why is this happening? I look back and I think that those were my weakest points. I've learned over the years that those moments of extreme suffering, when life, it just doesn't make sense. Not only am I not alone, but in that moment, I am so closely united to Jesus in that suffering. In Romans, it says that we don't know how to pray as we ought, but the Spirit intercedes for us with inexpressible groanings. Those prayers of just anguish, crying out to God, those are big. They mean a lot. Just being with our Lord, and He, everybody has different struggles, different size crosses. This has been my cross. Is this depression, anxiety, and something that really helped me in all of my experiences with depression and anxiety is to go back to what I know to be true. And something that a counselor told me, I don't know how many years ago, was to remember, you've dealt with this before, in my case, and this time when it came up again, what you know is that God got you through it. Like, you survived. His grace will be there this time around. And you've got to show up and try and cooperate with that grace. But he's got you. He's gonna see you through it again. When my third son was born, I actually was having lots of anxiety prior to his birth, which was something I'd never experienced. So all three were very different experiences. But the difference came with my third, whenever my father unexpectedly passed away 2 days before my son was born. And so he died on a Thursday, and we were funeral planning on Friday, and I went into labor that night, and I had my baby on Saturday. And it was early, like he was like a week and a half early, something like that, probably just from the stress of all of it. And you'd think that I'd be a basket case after that, given my history, but somehow, again, God knows what we need. We were prepared ahead of time, and I started medication pretty early, but I also started seeing a counselor. My husband and I started seeing a marriage counselor. There were lots of things that we did to mitigate the issues that I was going through. And I think the baby was, I guess, a good distraction from the stuff that my family was dealing with. And I guess I hate to use the word distraction, but at the same time, it was that joy and that love. It was there all over again, and he's been the most wonderful baby. And he's almost a year now. And then at the same time, having to be there for my family, be there for my mom in her grief, and we all experience grief differently. Being there for her enabled me to not focus as much on myself. And I think that helped me to kind of maybe pull out of that depression. It's very weird how it all took place. But with my first, like I said, it lasted about a year. With my second, it was about 6 months. With my third, it was only 3 months. So, God willing, when we have another child, I hope that the time that I spend in that period of cloudiness, insecurity, anxiety, this isolated feeling, I'm hoping it'll be less. And if it's not, then I'm gonna assume that that's God's will and that's a cross that I'll need to bear. But something that it's important to remember is that it's not something that God's doing to you. It's something that God is suffering right along with you. God didn't do that to me, but He did allow it to happen. And I may not know the reason for it right now, but I do know that I'm stronger. You have an army of saints that are there willing to pray for you. Saint Therese, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint Catherine of Siena, Saint Joan of Arc, all of these saints, Saint Dymphna, she's the patron of mental illness, and then our Blessed Lady. All of these women have been intercessors for me in one way or another. And I would say that if you're struggling with anxiety, depression, any sort of postpartum weirdness that you don't understand, talk to someone. Whoever your provider is, talk with them. Get the help that you need. And, if you need to go the route of medication like I did, that's okay. I was very nervous to start that process, but if you need it, and some of us really need it, it will help. And what I would say is that definitely don't just seek out medication, but speak to a counselor, get a spiritual director if you can. That's been incredibly helpful for me over the past 3 years. Someone to talk to about prayer. Really make prayer a priority. Pray and receive the sacraments as often as you can. Go to confession regularly. It really helps, even if you're like, well, I'm not really doing anything wrong. I've just got all these bad things happening to me. It helps. You need the grace, and it makes a big difference. And definitely, I would say, if you can, pray the rosary as often as possible, daily if possible. Our Lady is incredible, and she makes things happen. And that's been a huge blessing to my family, is our daily rosary that we pray. There were times in my experience where I felt like I was going to be the way I was in that state forever. It was going to be this awful, dreadful experience for the rest of my life. And it's not. It's not going to be forever. Life changes for the better, and it's going to get better. It will. And even if you can't see that right now, there is hope for your future, and God has a plan, as cliche as that sounds. It is, it's gonna be good. He's gonna take care of you, and just keep looking to the prize, keep looking towards heaven, keep turning your eyes to heaven, and He will direct you and He'll be with you.